modern medicine is great for certain things. Bones broken, wounds, fantastic. Obviously, for helping us once we've got something, it's amazing. But there's certain things that it doesn't know about really yet, certain diseases and conditions that are maybe even unique to the individual, and it's not the cure all to everything. And I think putting all our reliance on that once something's happened isn't always the most, again, empowering way to go. And I think what you're talking to is different approaches and remedies and ways of working that aren't a antidote to once you have something. It's more, let's call it, it's not the right word, but let's call it preventative measures. It's
Mhm.
ways of living to keep you in the best place possible, mentally, spiritually, and physically, to avoid getting any of these things to the point that you have to go to the hospital. But then if you need to, that's what they're there for, worst case scenario. And I think this is another side of the coin. Like, how can you live your best life, not just mentally, but from a physical perspective?
Yeah, and I think often, and I've seen it so much, is that the things like the NHS, like they operate off of an illness model. So that once you get sick, if you have a chronic illness, then that's where you want to be. You
Sure.
know what I do, and what the other side of that coin is based on a wellness model. It's what can I do to support myself so I don't end up in the illness model. And so they aren't that they're the opposite sides of the exact same coin. They're not separate and they're not intrinsically different. They're just a different framing. So if I've got a chronic condition, cancer, heart disease, any of those sorts of things, I want that illness model to be there. I want to be able to access that.
Yeah.
But using a wellness model, how do I support myself and be sovereign over my own health? And I think a lot of people don't see themselves as or feel empowered to be sovereign over their own health. They think, oh, well, it's inevitable that I'm going to get sick and fall into this kind of illness paradigm. Where if they had have approached their lives from a wellness paradigm, I think ultimately for me, and I can't say this for everybody, but for me, I'd just like to die an old lady comfortable in my bed. And I think using the wellness paradigm and framing it that way for myself, I have a fighting chance. But if I don't, and if something happens, then I'm glad that the illness paradigm's there, to biochemically support me.
Yes.
Um, that's the way I frame it for myself.
That's a really interesting way of framing it. I've never heard of it put that way, but it's totally clicked with me, at least, that idea of illness model and wellness model. And I think that's really empowering. And hopefully, even if just one person listening has that trigger for them, then that could be really useful.
Yeah.
Because it makes total sense. Why do you think it is that people don't see that perspective of a wellness model or aren't empowered to live that way? I mean, a lot of people do. Let's not mistake that. But why is it that the majority, do you think, isn't aligned with that or hasn't been?
I I think it just comes down to framing. I think it just gives it some time, the time for that message to be out there in the kind of general populace. I don't think that it's, I mean, 100 years ago, or just over 100 years ago, women couldn't have their own bank accounts. Gay partners couldn't get married. Things like that. I think it's just about getting that framing out there as part of conventional wisdom and popular discourse so that we can start having these conversations like the conversation that you and I are having now. And that thought sometimes only occurs to you when someone's brought it up. It's like, actually, and you take it away and you think about it, and then all of a sudden that framing kind of makes sense. I mean, I think for the last, certainly since the antibiotics have been developed, and if you look at it historically, that we've all thought that we can pop a pill to help ourselves. We've all been taught that from that we think that there's a pill that we can pop for depression, SSRIs and there, or Valium, and there's so much of that stuff going around, and we've still got certainly epidemic levels of mental health. So this, and again, even with COVID-19 is also teaching us that popping a pill isn't necessarily all that we can do. And I think that it's this time in our lives is right for actually understanding that there's a different way of us being able to frame the idea of our health, because if we don't have our health, no amount of money is going to save us, and the amazing thing about COVID-19 is that it doesn't discriminate. Boris Johnson's just been, you know, been diagnosed, Tom Hanks, all these people that have everything, in a material sense, and everything that our culture deems as important. And yet this illness isn't discriminating. It's not discriminating against age, well, it is a bit discriminating against age, but that's about the only thing it is discriminatory towards.